The year is 1923. Cairo's Continental Hotel, Egypt. A wealthy British lord lies writhing in his bed, high fever, gasping for air. At precisely 1:55 a.m., he draws his final breath. But here's the chilling part. At that exact moment, the entire city of Cairo is plunged into darkness as the power fails. Thousands of miles away in England, this lord had a pet dog. Suddenly, the hound begins to howl in distress, and within moments, it too drops dead. Only months prior, this man had breached a 3,000-year-old tomb. Carved outside was a terrifying warning. Death shall come on swift wings to whoever disturbs the peace of the pharaoh. Whoever dares to interrupt the pharaoh's slumber, death will carry them away on its wings. Over the next 6 years, 22 people linked to this tomb met their end. The secretary's 78-year-old father leapt to his death from a 7th-story window. A radiologist died suddenly, and when scientists performed an autopsy on the 3,000-year-old mummy, they discovered something that, to this day, no one can explain. The world gave it a name: the Curse of the Pharaoh. Hello everyone. This story begins a few months before that fateful death, November 1922. In Egypt's Valley of the Kings, British archaeologist Howard Carter and his workmen were excavating through sand and stone. For years, Carter had been hunting for a pharaoh whose name had been almost entirely erased from history. That pharaoh was Tutankhamun. Carter was no elite scholar. His father was an animal painter who drew portraits of aristocrats' pets. As a child, Carter was frequently ill and never attended school. He inherited only one thing from his father: a paintbrush. Then, an English lord noticed the 17-year-old's watercolors and recommended him for a post in Egypt. Carter's benefactor, the wealthy aristocrat Lord Carnarvon, had spent nearly £50,000 over the last 15 years. 15 years. £50,000, and absolutely nothing to show for it. Carter was down to his very last chance. Carnarvon had made it perfectly clear this was the final season. If they found nothing this time, the funding would be cut off permanently. The morning of the 4th of November, 1922. As Carter arrived at the excavation site, a strange, heavy silence hung in the air. His foreman delivered the news. They had found a step, hewn directly into the bedrock. Carter's heart began to hammer against his ribs. He ordered his men to dig with renewed, almost frantic ferocity. By the afternoon of November the 5th, the debris was cleared, revealing a complete staircase, 10 feet high and 6 feet wide. Upon reaching the 12th step, they encountered a sealed door, plastered shut and stamped with the royal seal of Anubis, the jackal god of the underworld. It was the unmistakable signal of a royal tomb. But whose tomb was it? Nearly 60 tombs had already been uncovered in the Valley of the Kings, the vast majority plundered by thieves centuries ago. By the 24th of November, all 16 steps had been cleared. Now, a name could be clearly read upon the sealed entrance: Tutankhamun. Carter knew then, beyond any shadow of a doubt, that he had finally discovered the pharaoh he had been hunting for years. November the 26th, 1922. A day Carter would later describe as the most wonderful day of his life. He made a tiny breach in the upper corner of the sealed door. Hot air escaped from the darkness. It was a 3,000-year-old sanctuary containing 5,398 objects, a 10-kilogram mask of solid gold, a dagger forged from meteorite iron that had fallen from the heavens, a coffin of solid gold, and 130 walking sticks. Everything lay exactly as it had been placed 3 millennia ago, following the pharaoh's burial. It was, quite simply, the greatest archaeological discovery in human history. But as the news echoed across, something peculiar began to happen. Within days of the discovery, an event occurred that sent a wave of terror through the local Egyptians. Carter kept a pet in his house, a golden canary. One afternoon, his assistant was sent to the house on an errand. As he approached, a piercing, glass-shattering shriek rang out. When he reached the cage, he saw a nightmare. A royal cobra had coiled itself inside, with the golden bird clamped firmly in its jaws. Imagine the scene: a hooded cobra, cold and motionless inside the cage, the golden canary dangling from its mouth. The news spread through Egypt like wildfire. For the locals, the cobra was the ultimate symbol of royal vengeance. The word on the streets was clear: the king's cobra had exacted its first toll for the disturbance of its master's rest. They warned that this was only the beginning, that something truly terrible was about to unfold. Mere months following the momentous discovery of the tomb, on the 6th of March, Lord Carnarvon was bitten upon the cheek by a mosquito. The following day, while shaving, he inadvertently nicked the site with his razor, unknowingly inviting a lethal infection. Amidst the sweltering, oppressive heat of the Egyptian summer, a fly alighted upon the open wound, turning the affliction into full-blown septicemia. Carnarvon was gripped by a raging, delirious fever. Doctors mandated a draconian diet and a total prohibition of spirits, yet Carnarvon remained defiant, uncorking further bottles of vintage wine from his ancestral English estate. On the 5th of April, 1923, within the walls of Cairo's Continental Hotel, at precisely 1:55 a.m., Lord Carnarvon breathed his last. What renders this tragedy truly harrowing is an event that transpired 12 days prior. A letter from the novelist Marie Corelli was published in the Daily Express, issuing an overt warning to Carnarvon. Corelli claimed to possess an ancient text stating that anyone who breached a sealed sepulchre would endure a most terrible punishment. A novelist had issued a public prophecy to the world, and less than a fortnight later, the man was dead. At the exact moment of his expiration, two occurrences solidified the legend. As previously noted, the entire city of Cairo was plunged into total darkness. When the British High Commissioner demanded an explanation, the electricity department had none. Simultaneously, thousands of miles across the sea in England, Carnarvon's pet terrier, Susie, began to howl in distress, before dropping dead at that very same hour. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the brilliant architect of Sherlock Holmes, suggested that an evil elemental, a supernatural entity, may have been the catalyst for the illness. When the master of logic himself admits the possibility of a curse, the world listens. The global press seized the narrative with predatory zeal. Headlines such as "The Curse of the Pharaoh" and "The Curse of King Tut." George J. Gould, the formidable American financier who visited the tomb, succumbed to a fever the following morning. The broadsheets cried, "Another victim of the Pharaoh." British industrialist Joel Wolfe visited the site. He too was struck down by an inexplicable fever. Lord Carnarvon's half-brother, Aubrey Herbert, perished within 6 months. Sir Archibald Reed, the radiologist who performed the inaugural X-ray on the mummy, died suddenly. Members of the excavation, Arthur Mace, Professor Breasted, and the assistant reporters, all fell into this grim tally. Every time an Egyptologist drew their final breath, regardless of age or existing malady, the news remained unchanged. The curse has claimed another. The ultimate irony? Arthur Weigel, the very journalist who championed the curse above all others, succumbed to a fever in Egypt, becoming victim number 21. The myth had finally consumed its creator, yet the most horrific exit was yet to be staged. In 1929, Carnarvon's secretary, Richard Bethel, died from blood clots in the heart. When his 78-year-old father, Lord Westbury, received the devastating news, he was overcome by a singular despair. He opened the window of his 7-story London apartment and leapt to his doom. By 1929, 22 individuals linked to the tomb were dead, and then a discovery surfaced that shattered the scientific community. In 1926, during the autopsy of Tutankhamun's mummy, Dr. Douglas Derry identified a distinct circular lesion upon the pharaoh's cheek. It was located in the exact same spot where the insect had bitten Lord Carnarvon, the same mark, the same cheek. A 3,000-year-old monarch and a modern English lord, united by a single, terrifying scar. The press descended into a frenzy. The world finally had its answer. The tomb was guarded by an ancient malady, and for those who dared disturb it, the only reward was death. In absolute reality, Tutankhamun's parents were full brother and sister. Yes, you heard that correctly. We must first comprehend who this boy king actually was, and precisely how his final resting place remained undisturbed for 3 millennia. Tutankhamun was born in the year 1329 BC, during the most volatile and fractured epoch in ancient Egyptian history. From the very moment of his birth, his survival was in mortal peril. For thousands of years, Egypt had worshipped a vast pantheon of deities. Yet, Tutankhamun's father, the radical pharaoh Akhenaten, abruptly rejected these traditional gods. He decreed there was but one true supreme power, Aten, the sun disk. He shuttered the ancient temples, banished the priesthood, and relocated the capital. It was a grand theological experiment, and it collapsed into absolute ruin. A monumental inscription from Tutankhamun's own reign, the Restoration Stela, reveals the sheer anarchy that gripped the nation. The gods had turned their backs on Egypt. The temples lay in dereliction. Following Akhenaten's demise, it was amidst this very chaos that an 8-year-old child was thrust onto the throne. His birth name was Tutankhaten, meaning the living image of Aten. When he eventually reversed his father's ruinous religious decrees, he cast off that title and became Tutankhamun, the living image of Amun. His sovereignty was tragically brief. At the tender age of 18 or 19, he was dead. In 1968, an X-ray of his skull revealed a prominent dark shadow at the base, a blemish often caused by a severe blow to the back of the head. For decades, historians speculated that the young king had been brutally assassinated, but the genuine narrative is far more disturbing. Within the Egyptian royal house, intense inbreeding was not merely common, it was a sacred obligation. Generations of siblings married siblings to preserve the divine bloodline. But as any basic student of biology understands, prolonged genetic isolation inevitably breeds catastrophe. Consequently, Tutankhamun suffered from a severe clubfoot deformity. His lower limbs were twisted and warped. He lived in a state of perpetual physical frailty, unable to take a single step without assistance. It is for this precise reason that his tomb contained no fewer than 130 walking sticks. Furthermore, he was afflicted with Kohler's disease, a harrowing bone disorder that causes excruciating chronic pain. And when modern scientists scrutinized his mummy, they discovered traces of severe malaria. Today, global experts agree Tutankhamun was killed by a lethal combination of these genetic and physical afflictions. He was such an insignificant, minor footnote of a pharaoh that his successors intentionally struck his name from the royal registers. And that is the ultimate paradox. Because his name was erased from history, grave robbers never knew he existed. For 3,000 years, the world forgot him, saving his treasures from plunder until his spectacular awakening. If I were to conclude our journey here with the 22 mysterious deaths, the sudden blackout, and the eerie matching scars, you would likely leave convinced that the pharaoh's curse was absolute reality. But now, I shall reveal the true twist in the tale, a revelation far more stunning than any supernatural fable. Remember that terrifying warning supposedly carved upon the tomb: death shall come on swift wings to whoever disturbs the peace of the pharaoh. The global press claimed a clay tablet bearing this inscription was found right at the threshold, and that Carter suppressed it to prevent his Egyptian laborers from fleeing in terror. However, when linguistics experts subjected the text to close scrutiny, they noticed something highly peculiar. The prose didn't resemble ancient Egyptian in the slightest. The vocabulary sounded suspiciously like the sensationalized words of the novelist Marie Corelli. And that is precisely what it was. The truth finally emerged decades later. The tomb's security chief, Richard Adamson, made a startling confession. Whilst the excavations were underway, a persistent journalist kept hounding the team for stories of ancient curses. Adamson admitted they had found absolutely no such text. But when the reporter pressed them, the crew simply didn't deny it. With nothing more than a subtle, knowing smile, they remained silent. And from that singular smile, a reporter's wild imagination and a team's quiet complicity, the world's most famous curse was born. The inscription was an absolute fiction, a total fabrication. In 1933, the renowned German Egyptologist Professor Steindorf published a comprehensive study dissecting every single death linked to the tomb. After investigating each individual's medical history, his verdict was absolute. Not a single demise had any logical connection to the opening of the sepulchre. Science soon provided the final nail in the supernatural coffin. In 1963, Dr. Ezzedine Taha of Cairo University examined excavation workers and discovered that many were suffering from Aspergillus niger, a resilient fungus that had survived inside those airtight tombs for millennia. Once inhaled, it triggers severe, life-threatening respiratory inflammation. In plain English, the legendary curse of the pharaohs could have been entirely vanquished by a simple course of antibiotics. Yet, even here, history delivered a staggering, deeply ironic blow. Immediately following the press conference where Dr. Taha scientifically dismantled the myth, he was killed in a fatal motor car accident. The very man who exposed the fallacy of the curse had now become a part of its grim lore. It is a beautiful irony, isn't it? However, in 2002, a rigorous study published in the British Medical Journal finally put the supernatural matter to rest using the scientific method. They identified 44 Westerners who were present in Egypt during the excavation. 25 had physically entered the tomb, 19 had not. The definitive finding? There was absolutely no statistically significant difference in the survival rate. In fact, the legendary investigator James Randi calculated that the average lifespan of those supposedly cursed was 73 years, an age that actually exceeded the life expectancy of their social class at the time. If anything, the pharaoh's wrath seemed to grant them longevity. Furthermore, the specific pillars holding up the myth crumble upon close inspection. Take the famous Cairo blackout. Dr. Joyce Tilsley, a prominent Egyptologist, noted that power cuts were an incredibly mundane occurrence in 1920s Cairo. It was a mere fluke of timing. And what of Carnarvon's faithful hound, Susie? If one accounts for the time zones, the synchronicity vanishes completely. Susie perished at 4 o'clock in the morning in England, whereas Carnarvon passed away at 1:55 a.m. Cairo time, which translates to midnight in London. They did not die at the same hour at all. Lord Carnarvon did not simply collapse from a sudden supernatural strike. He had suffered from chronic ill health for years. He had traveled to Egypt specifically because his fragile constitution could no longer endure the brutal London winters. Moreover, in 1923, penicillin did not exist. Today, a mosquito bite is a minor nuisance. A century ago, without antibiotics, it was a potential death sentence. The overwhelming majority of the casualties had severe pre-existing conditions. As for the legendary circular scar on the mummy's cheek matching Carnarvon's wound, that claim was entirely manufactured by the Morning Post, a newspaper fiercely resentful of the Times' exclusive deal. Their reporting was driven by bitter corporate warfare, not investigative journalism. Every claim has been systematically tested, every piece of evidence scrutinized, but we are left with one final, beautifully simple test. If Tutankhamun's curse were genuine, who should have been struck down first? At number 3, we look to Lady Evelyn, Carnarvon's daughter. She was among the absolute first individuals to cross the threshold into the inner chambers. She lived a full life until 1980, passing away at the ripe age of 78. Number 2, Dr. Douglas Derry, the anatomist who physically unwrapped the pharaoh and performed the autopsy. He survived until 1961, reaching 87 years of age. And what of our chief protagonist? Target number 1, Howard Carter himself, the very man who violated the sanctuary, breached the seals, and handled the royal remains. Carter lived for another 16 years following the discovery, eventually passing away in 1939 at the age of 64 from natural causes. Throughout those remaining years, Carter was relentlessly hounded by journalists, eager to extract a comment about the curse. His response never wavered. It was a steadfast, defiant, "I am still alive." The ancient Egyptians held a profound belief. A person only truly perishes when their name is spoken for the last time. Tutankhamun's vengeful successors intentionally sought to erase his identity from the tablets of history, burying his legacy for 3,000 years. But then, the son of a modest animal painter brushed aside the desert sands, granting this forgotten 18-year-old monarch a spectacular renaissance. Today, Tutankhamun is undisputed as the most famous pharaoh in human history. His name is etched permanently into the consciousness of the world. And perhaps now, because of Howard Carter, the young king can look across the centuries and echo those very same words. I am still alive.